Timmy Pierce, and I'm the executive director for another 2.5 weeks, and then I retire. So, I welcome you, and we are very glad to have Mary Jane Buettner with us today. She has a fascinating talk for you. And it was my pleasure to be able to interview her on WTTR, and it was one of our better interviews, I think. So without further ado, here is Mary Jane Buettner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you for coming here today and being part of this presentation, because without many of the people here giving me information, giving me their remembrances of Westminster in the 40s through the 80s, I would not have been able to achieve this. And some, I'm sorry to say, are not here any longer. Mr. Beaver, Mr. Fisher, I got much of my information from them regarding Westminster during that period of time, and also St. John's Church. I also want to thank Timmy for a wonderful introduction. Kathy Beatty, Linda, and Debbie at the Historical Society. You know, I used to call it the hidden gem of Carroll County, but I don't think it's the hidden gem anymore, because I think many, many, many more people are finding it, and they're volunteering there and realizing that there's so much more to it than one little segment. You can do as much or as little as you want there. And the library is incredible, and I did get a lot of my information there as well. Up a little? Okay. Okay. That's good. Okay. So I want to thank everyone for being here. There was an inquiry yesterday from some people who wanted to find out whether they could go to St. John's Church to see these artifacts that we're going to be investigating today on the presentation. And I was able to have someone available to anyone who wants to go back there. Deacon Joe Cinquino will be there, as well as another volunteer. So I think once you see these in this presentation, you may want to go back and see what they really look like in person. So please know that all of you will be welcome at St. John Church. All right, let's get started here. The picture we're looking at right now is the oldest picture that I was able to get. It's actually from a tintype. And the school to the left, I'm sorry, the parsonage to the left and the school to the right. To the left behind the parsonage was the convent. And then behind the church was the graveyard. And the graveyard, of course, is still there, but now we have the Carroll County Library that sits in that location. Oh, sure.
I'm going to turn it down a little bit if you could just talk a little
Lower?
louder.
Louder.
Because we have a little feedback.
Sure. Okay.
In this one.
Okay. Talk a little louder. That's not a problem. Although I want to mention to you, I will be sitting down at times during this because I had surgery on my foot, so I hope you'll understand that and bear with me on that one. But we can sit here just like we're sitting in my living room talking, and I like it that way. I like it more friendly and warm that way. So people have said to me, why is there a graveyard behind the library? So now this explains why that is so, and then we'll move on to the presentation. I like to call it Hidden Treasures Lost Then Found, because this is the story of St. John Church, the artifacts that were inside of it. And the church originally was built in 1866. And these artifacts, what happened to them? Because when the church was torn down, what really happened to them? And where did they go? And where are they now? These pictures were through the research at the Historical Society, and I think they're quite interesting. This is 1866 at the intersection of Main and Liberty Street, crossing where the Western Maryland Railway is today. And on the right here, you can see St. John Church that's being built during that time. And the steeple hasn't been put on there yet. So it's kind of interesting to see what it looked like back then. This is a stereo view from the early 1870s. It's Main Street on a winter's day. The interesting thing, there is a one-price store. Oh, let's go back. Oh, sorry. Oh my goodness. Where are we going here?
Going the wrong way.
I know. Ah. Let me get it back this way. Let's see.
You hit that button, it just took off.
I know, it did. Oh, God. There we go. There we go. Okay. There we go. Now we can start over. Okay. This picture was from the 1860s. And let's go to this next one here. That's the one that's the one where I messed up. Sorry about that. Okay. There is a one-price store back here, which is kind of interesting. So they even had dollar stores back then. Of course, they were probably nickel stores or 10-cent stores back then. But there were one-price stores like we know today. So that's kind of interesting. This shot was taken in 1896. It's the Westminster Fire and Hose Company predominantly, and you can see St. John Church next to it. It looks like the church is much smaller than the Fire and Hose Company, but it is not. It's just the angle that this was taken from. And we think this was from a state firemen's convention that was held in Westminster, because if you consider all the 4th of July flags that are there, and you can see the, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. What did I do? I don't know why it's jumping like that. Sorry. You can see the ladies' dresses. They are significant of that time frame. And this is the old train station. Of course, the tracks are still there, but the train station is long gone. But when it was built, it was rivaling the train station in Baltimore, Maryland. And there was a write-up about it in the Democratic Advocate saying that there was not a finer station in the state, built somewhat on the style of the Mount Royal Station in Baltimore. This panoramic view shows a tiny bit of the steeple right up there. But this is looking toward, if you were standing at the railroad tracks, you would be looking toward the Mather's department store, which used to be there, which, does anybody remember some of those stores along Main Street? Yeah, they were wonderful. And so you're looking in that direction. This is an interesting photo because it shows, I feel like the photographer probably stood in the same spot 40 years later to take this shot. The first one's from 1910 and the second from 1950. And if you look on the 1910 slot, you can see horses and buggies. And in the 1950 slot, you see a cemented schoolyard and the old cars. So this, it's kind of interesting to see how the same shot was taken 40 years later. The oldest interior shot that I have of St. John's Church is this one. It was from the 1900s. You can see in the ceiling the ribs that were similar to that in Henry VIII's chapel in Westminster Abbey. And I want you to notice the altar, the angel statues, the Mother of Christ is here, and the St. Joseph statue is here, the father, stepfather. And we'll see these later on in some of the other shots. But I wanted to point those out to you. And this was taken at Christmas time, and it took them 30 minutes to light the candles. They had so many candles. But my thought is, look how close the evergreens are to the candles. Oh, amazing. The church was repainted in the 1930s, and this is a shot of that. They removed a lot of the filigree that was on the painted on the ceilings, and you can see a lot of the artifacts that I mentioned a minute ago a little better in this one. this picture amazes me because I think it was a communion breakfast, what we used to call a communion breakfast. And if anybody can, and I should mention, if anybody has information that they can share with me about any of these pictures or the story or anything, I mean, this is a work in progress. So anyone, I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say. But this, as far as I can tell, was a communion breakfast. When it was blown up, you can see cereal bowls here. And then there's ladies all along here dressed in white that probably were the helpers, the servers for that. And I know it wasn't taken at St. John. Does anybody recognize those windows? Could that possibly have been McDaniel College, what we know as McDaniel College today? Does anybody recognize that? Because I'm trying to pinpoint that a little bit better if I can. This is a picture of the first school of St. John. In 1898, he brought the School Sisters of Notre Dame to the school. They were the first ones to teach there. And now we're going to go on to Main Street in the 1950s. Does it bring back any memories to anyone? Oh, I'll bet. Murphy's Five and Dime, Endicott Johnson, and many other little stores that I'm sure you can all tell me great stories about. And this is looking in the opposite direction. And this is circa 1950. I'm not quite sure of the date, but I'm looking for the steeple here, and the steeple is missing. So I'm thinking it could be after this date, because this is a very important date. Thursday, June 19th, 1952 at 4:45. And I'm going to actually read this to you because it's a quote from through Deacon Mark Ripper's book, Our History, Our Legacy. And this was described by Reverend Stephen Melcher. On Thursday, June 19th, 1952, at 4:45 p.m., the storm hit Westminster. The weather had been unusually hot, up in the 90s, in the 90-degree range, and then the temperature dropped several degrees within a few minutes. Heavy rain moved in from the west. High winds followed the rain, and with them came a spectacular play of lightning and a twister. Simultaneously, a bolt of lightning struck our once beautiful steeple and broke it in half. The twister picked up the top half and threw it upon the roof of the rectory next door. The steeple's bottom half was torn from its foundation and pushed off balance, tottered, and fell through the roof of the church. The story continues as recounted by Lester Stem. Pastor James Dwyer's mother was sitting on the front porch of the rectory as the storm was approaching. As the winds grew stronger, Mrs. Dwyer decided to go into the rectory and back into the kitchen. Just minutes after she had left the porch, the strong winds of the storm toppled the steeple, which crashed through the porch and the front part of the house where she had been. Amazingly, no one was injured. Now, I have to mention this. Last week, I did a presentation for the School Sisters of Notre Dame in Baltimore. And one of the nuns came up to me and said she was from Westminster. She was thrilled to see the poster that I had with my book cover on it. And she said, "I'm from Westminster. I'm so excited that you're here." And she knew nothing about my book. She knew nothing about the content or anything. And she said, "I got to tell you a story." And I thought, well, you know, I'm setting up everything for the talk, but I was very interested in what she had to say. And she said, well, my brother drove me down to Main Street to pick up my mother's dress at Mather's department store. And he didn't have room to park on Main Street, so he pulled into an area between the rectory and the church. He said, "Now stay in the car, I'll be right back." And he went over to get the dress. And while he was gone, she said the sky got so dark and actually lifted up her car and turned it around one complete time. So she was sitting in it, and she said, she was 11 years old. Maybe I should go into the church. Maybe that's a safer place to be. And as she reached for her handle, she said the steeple actually fell from the roof, came down, bounced, twisted, and went into the rectory. and she saw this. She was an eyewitness. I couldn't believe. Getting ready to do this for the Historical Society, I had an eyewitness. It was great. It was just great. So I wanted to share that all with you because I haven't seen anything about that. And this woman later on became a nun, and I feel like it's a good source for the information. Yes? So it was pretty amazing. Well, after this happened, here's a picture of what, this area she was talking about. And fortunately, no one was injured. I mean, that's pretty much of a miracle in itself. And of course, the people standing around looking at the destruction, maybe you're on there, I don't know. We might be able to pick you out if we look real closely. Of course, the youngest person on there is everybody in this audience. Now, the church was repaired, and they continued to use it for services until 1977. In March, they actually demolished the church on Main Street. And until a more modern church was built, the congregation worshipped at Mass at Baker Chapel on what was then the Western Maryland campus, and also at the St. John Gymnasium. Ground was broken on May 30th of 1971, and this church was dedicated in 1972. Now, you can see the difference in the architecture between the two churches. The first one was Gothic. It had these wonderful high ceilings and lots of space between the windows, and actually lots of space for the windows, too. But when they moved to this church, we came here in 1976, so we're transplanted from Baltimore. And I hope you won't hold that against me, but because I love Carroll County. The geometric designs were used in this church. It was a much more modern church. So they had windows that were stained glass, but they were just geometric shapes. And the stained glass window, and the Stations of the Cross, which I'll show you more about later, were geometric shapes as well. So it was just a very modern type of church, and it couldn't really take all of the artifacts that were in the old church. Fortunately, some of the artifacts proved to be timeless, and these were taken to that church that I just showed you on Monroe Street. The Sacred Heart of Jesus, Mary, the Blessed Mother of Christ, St. Joseph, the husband of Mary. And this shot's kind of interesting. You can see a child pulling the father's beard. It's kind of just like a child would do, kind of innocent. Now, when this all happened, I was very unaware of all of this, that things were being taken out of the old church. We were just coming up at the time when this was all happening. And Father Joe, Monsignor Joe Antaszewski was the pastor when we came here. And I understand, and I felt too, he was a very generous person. Since they couldn't use these stained glass windows and the Stations of the Cross, he gave the stained glass windows to a parish in southern Maryland that was to be built. They were going to build a chapel, and he offered them the stained glass windows. Now, these were Franz Meyer stained glass windows that are priceless. So he was very generous to offer them. And they were from Munich, Germany, circa 1860. Just beautiful, incredible, priceless stained glass windows. These angel statues were taken to a barn in Greenmount, Maryland. So we're starting to see the exodus of these items leaving. This ornate wrought iron pulpit was donated from the Main Street location to St. Bartholomew's in Manchester, Maryland. It still is there today in their original chapel. So if you want to visit that, you can. It's still there. It's beautiful. The original sanctuary lamp is there as well, and it is in their main church. And this picture is a typical votive stand that would be from that time frame. Now, how do I come into this whole picture? As I said, I was a parishioner of St. John, but I call this my miracle because I had decided, I worked with a friend, and she and I had lots of fundraisers for the Diabetes Association, the Heart Association, and the Baltimore Museum of Art, but I had never done anything major for St. John. So I had a hair salon, we sold it, and I was back up in Carroll County, and I thought, what can I do for my church? I know, I'm going to write a book. I'd written things that had gotten published, and had done things for the Baltimore Museum of Art, so I thought, well, why not give it a try? So I talked to Monsignor Art Valenzano and Sister Charlotte Byerly and told them my goal. I said, I don't know what's going to happen, I'll give it my all, but we'll see what takes place. So I had written a series of short stories, had 5 finished, and I was leaving church one day, and I saw this hanging in the back of church. And I didn't know anything about it, because I had never been to the old church on Main Street. So someone told me that this was, so as I was standing near it, and I was just getting my thoughts together, how am I going to take this book further? What am I going to do? You know, show me the way, dear Lord, show me the way. And a man walked up to me, and he said, that's beautiful, isn't it? I said, oh, it's incredible. He said, well, I'm the one that told him where they were. I said, what? Where were they? He said, they were in old Mr. Crone's barn for 26 years. I said, you're kidding. Oh, my gosh. I said, well, I'm writing a book. I know. If you'll give me information, it will be the last chapter of my book, and it's about the church, and I'm going to donate the proceeds to the church. It'll be great because it'll bring it all together. Will you give me information? He said, of course I will. For sure, I'll be happy to give you information. So then I started to ask all these questions about, what really happened. And this is what I saw when I walked into the basement of the rectory of St. John. Actually, it was in the basement of the parish center. I did not know they were there. These are called Stations of the Cross, and they were taken from the original church on Main Street to the basement to prepare to take them to be restored. And so I had to find out more about the story. It was just incredible. So I understood that Mr. and Mrs. Crone had kept them in their barn for all these years. And she was 90 years old, sharp as a tack, and willing to give me as much information as possible. So when I went to visit with her, she started telling me about the Hindenburg, the Titanic. Not that she was on any of them, but she had read about them, and she told me as much firsthand information as she could from living history. Oh, I was fascinated. 4 hours. I stayed with her for 4 hours. So I said, well, Mrs. Crone, I've got to find out what happened. How did these, I understand that these stations came to your barn. What really happened? And she said, well, we lived in Jessup, Maryland, and they had proposed Route 95 to come through our farm. And my husband said, you know what? They're going to take the farm one way or another. We've got to get out of here because they're not going to make 95 go like this and like that and then come back down. They're going to go right through our farm. So he came to Carroll County to find land and to find a home, pardon me, and she stayed in Jessup with the children and kept them in school. She said, and he decided he wanted to become an usher at St. John Church. So he walked in one day, and the very day he walked in was the day that all these artifacts were coming out of the church. They were walking right past him. Now, why were they walking past? Well, they were going to tear the church down, and they couldn't keep them there for one thing. And some families had donated things, and they were being given back to those families for safekeeping or as remembrances. Other people were offering a donation to be used for the new church and for the church that was the octagonal church that I showed you. So, so he walked in and saw these things, and he said, well, Father, what are you going to do with those things up there on the wall, those Stations of the Cross? Now, these are 4 by 6, about 8 inches deep, okay? And they had crosses and finials. And there were 14 of them. And he said, what are you going to do with them? And the father said, well, I don't know. He said, well, I'll take them. And he took them in a pickup truck, back and forth, made probably, 7 trips maybe? I'm thinking 2 at a time, and got them back to his barn and put them in the rafters of the barn and kept them there for 26 years. So I said, oh, I'm fascinated by the story she's telling me. So she said, you know what happened? She said, after we moved the family up to the barn, He walked me out there and pulled open those doors, and I looked up at them and I said, "Oh my gosh, Larry." And he said, "Honey, I want to keep them here until they come for them." Well, I stopped her and I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "That sounds like a movie. It sounds like Field of Dreams or something." Well, I was fascinated. And I said, "Did he really say that to you?" She said, "Yes, he did." She said, "And you know what?" And she's giving me this. "And you know what?" She said, "Father came with the men and a caravan, and they took them all back to St. John's, back where they belonged." Well, I said, I've got to add this into my story. This is just incredible information. I can't let this one go. So I had all this information ready. My book, which has taken me about 13 years to write, I'll be honest with you. It took a long, long time because I wasn't doing it full time. But I had all this information ready to go. And Mary Jo Judge said to me, "By the way, I've got some pictures for you in the barn. Would you like to have them?" I said, "You're kidding." So these are the picture of the stations in the barn, 3 of them in the barn. Well, I stopped everything. I had to pull my book apart and find room for these in there because I just wanted these to be part of the whole historical story. And each one of them was brought on a wagon back to the church, and they took photographs of each one. And if you look closely, you can see straw and hay, where the mice and the birds made nests while they were in the barn. Right in this area, up in here and down in here. So after hearing all these different things, and actually I hadn't gone to see the stations, and I had my camera in the car, and Father Monsignor Art gave me permission to take pictures of the stations. So these are some of the pictures that I was able to take as I walked throughout the basement of the parish center. And you're going to see how deteriorated some of the stations are in these pictures. The emotion was incredible. I mean, these were from Germany, and whoever was the artist, and I'm trying to find out who the artist was. In fact, in my book, I have a full page devoted to asking anyone who perhaps is doing a thesis, a religious thesis or something, perhaps they might want to research from the point that we have at this point farther to see what information, what history we can really find out about them. So I devoted that segment in there and asked, because, if the book goes out to many people, they may know someone who can do this, and we can keep the research going, keep the history going. These were made of horsehair and wood paste. Okay. Yes, I know, it's really, the wood paste was used because it had excellent molding and sculpting properties, and the horsehair was used as a binder because it had strength, elasticity, and durability. On the left side, actually that's the pulpit that you will see in the next, some of the other pictures we'll see later on. But the marble that you see on that left side was taken from the original church to people's basements, to their attics, and they kept it there for all those years. And then we had a call go out that if anyone had anything relating to the old church, please consider bringing it back, because perhaps we could use it in the new church that was built in 2003. And if you look on the right, these pieces were actually buried on people's farms, and they dug them up and brought them back in hopes that they could be used in the other church, in the new church. The center would have a cross attached when it was hung in its complete shape. And you can see the elaborate detailing, the gingerbread, as people would call it. There are finials, which I'll show you those right now. These are the finials that would fit on either side of the top of the station. So it was a full 4x6 when it was completed. Just some more pictures that I took down there. And now we'll start to see some of the before and after shots, because the person who restored these was incredible. And I wanted to devote time to her magnificent gift that she gave. Of course, she was paid for it, but she gave every Saturday for 2 years of her life to chipping off this paint and restoring these pictures. And she had a young girl who was about 12 years old who volunteered. See, because volunteering is very near and dear to my heart. That's what I've always enjoyed. And this whole book is a volunteer project, from the artwork to the writing to the editing to the photography and now the marketing. So the whole thing is volunteer. So when I heard about this young girl, maybe 11 years old, volunteering her Saturdays for 2 years, I was really impressed. So now you can see some of the before and after shots. When I took these pictures, I never dreamed that I would be putting these into my book. It was just amazing that everything has fallen into place for this entire project. And I have to give credit to Mr. Buckley, Mr. James Buckley in Manchester, Maryland, who's a professional photographer who took the pictures on the right, the after pictures of all of these, and many of the pictures inside the church, the statues and so forth. He also donated his time, and time, talent, and treasure, as we say, to all of these. So a special thanks to him. So when we found out that they needed these things back, Walter and Elizabeth Reed gladly returned the angels. And they now sit on each side of the sanctuary at St. John's. And these stained glass windows that Monsignor Joe was so kind to give away amazingly came back. He was battling cancer. And just before he passed away, he got a phone call. And this man from Southern Maryland said, "My wife is driving me crazy. I've got these stained glass windows in my basement, and I've got to get them out of here." And I'm sure he must have said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you know those ones you donated? Well, we only used one of them. The rest are here in my basement." Now here we are getting ready to build a new church. Father Joe was the one who started that. And all these artifacts are starting to come back. It was amazing. It was like God had his hand out there over the stations, over the stained glass windows, over the angel statues. All these pieces were coming back. They're magnificent. They really are. In my book, they're in black and white, but you can see them on the St. John website in full color, or come back today. But it was pretty amazing because all these pieces came back piece by piece, back where they belong. And you can see the pew at the bottom there. They're pretty sizable. I don't know the exact dimensions of them, but they are very sizable. To think that somebody had these stacked in their basement, that's amazing. Now there's a little change of pace. As I mentioned, my book was a volunteer project, and a dear friend of mine who is an artist in Ocean City, Maryland, designed the cover for me. She asked me what I wanted, and I told her I wanted a picture of a key and the church sitting on a key. So she started sketching, and I was there when she was doing this. And in this next shot, I was reading to her parts of the book, parts of the exciting parts of the book. And I said, definitely want to have reds and oranges in this background, and I want it to look like the hand of God is coming through the clouds, that it's parted. And so she's working on this as I'm reading, and it was just getting more and more interesting for me. I thought you might like to see how it all came together. when I decided to use the key, I actually do have a key. My book is about a woman who has a key collection from all over the world. And whenever she gets a key, she investigates what part it played in history or who had it in their possession. So someone gives her a key to an old church from 1865, which is St. John's Church. And it's been torn down, so now she's got to find out what happened. Why did they tear this masterpiece down? So when you read it, know that the front is fiction and the back is the historical part of it. But I got a key from my collection and gave it to her. So she's working on this thing, and I'm watching over her shoulder, and she said to me, I have a question. She said, what's the significance of the 3 shapes in the key? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, it looks like a fleur-de-lis pattern. And I said, well, you know, and it could be from the Catholic Church, it could be faith, hope, and charity. It could be God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, many things. It could be many different things. Why are you asking me? She said, because the key you gave me has the same shape, the same fleur-de-lis shape as the windows on the church. She said, where'd you get it? I said, I got it at a flea market or a yard sale in Westminster. She said, do you think it could be the church key? Do you think it could be St. John's Church key? I said, I don't know. I don't really know. It'll never be answered, but it was pretty amazing. And this is Monsignor Art Valanzano. He's living at the Basilica in Baltimore now, and was the person who picked up what Father Joe had begun and built the church that we now have in 2003. And I want to show you these artifacts now. The altar is right up here. These were all from the old church. Of course, you can see the stained glass windows. The Stations of the Cross are on either side. And the angel statues are right up there on the altar. So all of those pieces came back. It was just amazing. This was a print done by Norma Perron from St. John Church. And it shows, actually there were 5 churches originally. The original was the Conewago Chapel, which is north of McSherrystown. And then there was another small church called Christ Church in Westminster. And then the church on Main Street from 1866, and the octagonal church that you see here was built in 1972, and then the present church was 2003. What I want to do now is give you a little summary of what we've seen today. And this was created for me. This was also a volunteer thing that was created by a teacher from Carroll County who was helping me with my website. And she said, I did something for you last night. And I said, you did? She said, what is it? She said, it's called a photo story. And I put some music in too. She said, but I hope you like it. So I said, well, let me see it. So you get to share it now. I hope you enjoyed. Oh, we're starting over again. Electronics. I'm not very electronics. It took me 3 years to realize that I wasn't going to blow up the computer if I tried to turn it on. Everything was handwritten from the beginning. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll open this up to some questions and answers. Yes?
I'm from Virginia, and my family is from Westminster, Manchester, all around. And this is priceless, as you know. I would suggest you all consider putting it on Facebook, on Ancestry, on the Westminster whatever pages, to get the word out. And I would encourage anybody that's seen this, and if it gets out there, post it on their page.
Oh, what a great idea.
Because what I did is I created family pages for my different families up here, and I'm connected with my great-great-grandfather's family. We found my third great-grandfather's Bible had been donated to Goucher College, and this is all in 2 years. So you may find out the answers that you're looking for.
Wow, that's great. That's great, a great idea. And stop and see me afterwards so I can jot a few of those things down, because I think you have some wonderful information there. Yes? Oh, okay.
Were the stained glass pieces, did they need any restoration?
Okay, the question was, because I don't know, you were right in the middle there, so I think everybody heard you, but this young lady said, was there any restoration that had to take place on the stations or on the stained glass windows? Yes. Yes, there were a few cracks that were there, and they did have to do some restoration and some reletting. And they just look like they're brand new. They're beautiful. Well, they look very old, but you know, they're so meticulously done. They look incredible. Okay, sir, you had your hand up.
Yes. Your book is great. I need to make a commentary on my contact with St. John's. I was married at St. John in 1948. And those of you who know me, you're looking at an antique. I was the first non-Catholic married at the altar rail. Father Wills called me the day before the wedding and said, the Archdiocese has relented. You are a Protestant from Pennsylvania, and as such, you may be married at the altar rail. Before that, all non-Catholics were married in the vestibule.
Wow.
After that, I was transferred to Carroll County, next to the Delaware County line. Married to Nellie Getty. Come December, I'll be married 65 years. Her sister, the most amazing story about the picture windows, her sister lived at Chesapeake Beach, Jones, Maryland. They built a new church after the war. The Chesapeake area grew so rapidly, they had to build a new church, which is 6 miles southeast of Chesapeake Beach. And my wife's sister, Nancy, said, you've got to go see the new church that's built. We walked into the church, and Nancy Getty Haefele was married to Bernie Haefele, the Haefele family who were 100% Catholic in St. John's. We walked in, and here is the great big bay red window.
Oh my God.
And they said, where have you seen that? I said, I recognize it, but I don't know where it's from. He said, well, take a good look. They're from St. John's in Westminster. I said, wait a minute. How did they get here? And Bernie Haefele, being a man of discipline, said, our pastor here is Polish. Father Joe is Polish. The Pope is Polish. So those of you who go to Chesapeake Beach, to that church, you will see the red stained glass windows from St. John's in Westminster, Maryland, Carroll County.
What a great
One other
story.
item. You mentioned Conewaga Chapel. I was born in the shadow of Conewaga Chapel. I know where it is. And those of you who have not been to Conewaga Chapel need to know that it took 17 years for the Mason-Dixon line to be constructed and finalized. And that's why the Conowalka Chapel is in Pennsylvania today. It was granted by the Lord Baltimore's by deed and document. And today, William Penn did not like Catholics. And that's why the Conowalka Chapel is in Pennsylvania. And that's the end of my story.
Well, I think that was great. I think that was great. And Kathy, you got to sign him up for one of these because he's got lots of information he hasn't shared, I know. Yes, sir?
My name is Jerry Capel. I grew up in Westminster all my life. Excuse me. I'm a Catholic and very proud of it. I was baptized in the old church in 1955. In 1961, I started in the church, in the school, and I went through the school to grade 5. But I used to do a lot of work for Father Melcher, and I went down into the basement. I don't know if I can help you, but I saw a lot of those pictures. I recognized them because I saw them firsthand. Some of which we never even got a chance to put in the old church that actually is in the new church.
Wow.
And they were in the rectory basement and out at the school on Monroe Street.
I would love to talk with you further about those things.
Okay.
Yes, and honestly, anything. I mean, it's hard to do it right now, but I would like to get your name and number and
Okay.
talk with each of you. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to say to the gentleman over here, as a child that I did attend the Lady Star of the Sea down at Solomon's Island. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And for anybody that has noticed or cares, the young lady with me is my cousin. I'm not her great-great-grandfather. Thank you.
Oh, gosh. I'll take some more questions, but I do want to mention this in case anybody has to leave. I want them to know that, again, I'm offering an invitation to go back to St. John's. When we leave here today, there will be someone there to welcome you, and you can go in and see firsthand. There's nobody's going to, take your name or anything like that. You just go in and see it. If you enjoy seeing the history firsthand, you may do that if you'd like. And the Deacon Joe Cinquino, I believe is the way you say his name, he will be there along with a volunteer. So take some more questions. Yes, sir.
The rail stations that you have shown there, as I understood it, I think was most recently, was that replaced with the initial rail station that had been there?
You're speaking of the...
I'd like to show 2 different rail stations there.
Oh, the railroad. No, I think the railroad tracks are the same tracks, but the station's gone.
The station's gone, but
Right.
the station that I went in the Army through,
Uh-huh.
I think back beyond that, there was a smaller station that had been there. And it looked like you really showed it there.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Well, actually, I got this information from the Historic Society, and perhaps you might want to go to the library and check that out, because I only have a limited amount of information, but they are a wealth of information. And I do want to mention one more thing, too. I'll take your question in just a second. When I was doing research for this book, as I mentioned, I talked with some of the, I'll call them the elders of Carroll County. Oh, this is fascinating. And one gentleman who wasn't an original parishioner from here, but did a lot of research, pulled a lot of information. Somebody said to me, talk to Mr. Hansen. He's a wealth of information. His name was John Hansen. So I said, Mr. Hansen, I said, I was told to talk to you. I heard you knew everything. He went, well, I don't know about that, but I will give you one fact. He said, the day that old church was supposed to be consecrated by the Archbishop, he couldn't go. He had to go to the funeral of Abraham Lincoln. And I said, oh my gosh, I have got to put this in my story if it's true. I said, is that true? Is it really true? He said, look at the cornerstone. The cornerstone is April 18, 1865. And I went down to the Beano Railroad Museum, the Watkins Library down there. I went to the Catholic Center, and I actually sat in the vault holding in gloved hands, Timmy, gloved hands, the diary of Archbishop Spalding, and read what he did every day. And I couldn't substantiate that to be able to use it in the story, but it opened up the ability to bring a little bit of the Civil War into my story because it was happening at the time that the church was built. So it just made it so much better because of that. And that's what I mean. Things kept falling into my hands. Unbelievable. Can I help you? Uh-huh. The stations of the cross, you mean? Oh, the railroad station. Oh, okay. That's good to know. Okay. So the question was, or the comment was that the Historical Society has other pictures of the railroad station preceding the one that I showed today. So you see what I mean? They're there for all of us. I mean, it's just great. It's really great. I didn't realize what a gem it was until I got involved. And when I started my book, I went to the Carroll County Book Fair. I didn't know how to write a book. I've written things that had been published, but not a novel. I didn't know what that was going to entail. So someone at the Historical Society was there that day. This was 13 years ago. And I said, I want to write a book about, I'm going to, it's for St. John's, I'm going to donate the money to charity. Oh, by the way, the money from this book goes to whichever organization sponsors me. So anything that's purchased here today goes back into the Historical Society. If it's purchased at a fundraiser at St. John's, it goes there. If it's with the Art Council, it goes there. So anywhere, that's the way I worked it out. So I lost my train of thought. It must be, I'm sorry? My teen years, that's what it is. But, so I didn't really know that much about St. John's Church because I was a new parishioner.
Hey, John.
So somebody said to me, if you get at the Historical Society, if you get the date, we can search back. We can find that information. I said, I understand the steeple was struck by lightning or something. I don't know. And they said, well, get the date, and then we can go back. I said, oh, but I mean, I was a novice. I didn't know how to do any of this research. So I was at Harry's lunch 2 days later, and a man came in, sat down 2 stools over from me, tried to get my attention, tried to get my attention, tried to get my attention. Finally he did, and he said to me, do you remember when this place used to be across the street? I said, no, I didn't know it was. He said, yeah, Harry's grandfather had this place across the street. He said, look at this place. He said, he built this place. It was his new shop, his new, the new Harry's Lunch, or whatever it's called now. And he said, he built this place on 25-cent hot dogs. Do you believe that? I said, really? And I'm getting a kick out of him because he's very animated. He said, you could have built this place, and I could have built this place. I said, well, you got to be at the right place at the right time. And all of a sudden, the light bulb went off in my head. I needed the date, right? I said, hey, it sounds like you've lived your whole life in Westminster. He said, is that true? He said, yes, ma'am, I certainly have. I said, do you remember St. John's Church up the street? He said, remember it? Remember it? I was standing across the street and the steeple got struck by lightning. It was, and he gave me the date and the time and everything. And I was stunned. And that was the beginning of my story. That's how it all started. Then I could go back to the Historical Society and say, I got the date. I got the date. So I said to this gentleman, what is your name? He said, Charlie Brown. It was great. It was just great. And I thought maybe he was an angel sent to me or something, but he is a character here in Westminster, I understand. I have never come across him yet since that first day, but I hope to see him sometime and tell him how important his information was to me. It was great. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
The bell tower, does the bell come down through the church?
The bell did come down through the church, yes, and it made a hole in the church, yes.
The bell now is stationed at the second church in Monroe Street.
Yes, it is. The bell tower, it's in the, there's a bell tower at the second church. Amazingly, it did not crack when it hit the ground. And the other thing that was pretty amazing is when that steeple fell like that, and it did not crush stations, not one. It did not crush the windows. It just fell outside. So it was pretty amazing. I mean, it's just, I just feel like it's pretty incredible that all these things have been saved for all of us to enjoy. Any other questions?
Well,
yes.
What was the steeple made of that it was so?
what was the steeple made of? You know, I don't have that information, but it was kind of lightweight. And the thing that, from what I remember reading, was the fact that it was so tall. It was just so tall in comparison to the church that, you know, it wasn't a great balance because of that. And I guess, you know, who knows when a windstorm comes up, when a tornado comes up, it can do anything, really. It's pretty amazing, you know. Any other questions? Yes? Very true. Thank you, Trudy. Trudy mentioned about the organ. One of the people that I interviewed, whom I failed to mention, and he was very active, I believe, in the Historic Society as well, was Charlie Swinderman, who was the organist in 3 churches. And I took him to breakfast many times to the Purple Diner, and you know, and just let him talk. And he just gave me a boatload of information. And Charlie explained to me that this organ was restored and moved from one to the other. They had to put special strength in the floors every time they moved it. It was so incredibly heavy. And it was a very, very unique organ. Is there any other question? I'm looking to see if I have any organ notes. It was. Yes, sir. It was a molar organ. And that was one of the finest ones. Is that right? Okay. All right. Well, I think we've finished for the day, and I'll be here signing books if anybody's interested. Thank you so much.